Shabbat Shalom. There's a story in our Midrash that I often tell to our children here at Holy Blossom, which teaches. When Israel stood at Sinai to receive the Torah, the Holy One said, "Present to me good guarantors that you will guard my Torah, and then I shall give it to you." They said, "Our ancestors are our guarantors." The Holy One said, "Your ancestors are not sufficient guarantors. Bring me better guarantors, and I shall give you the Torah." They said, "Ruler of the universe, our prophets are our guarantors." God said to them, "The prophets are not sufficient guarantors. Bring me better guarantors yet, and I shall give you the Torah." They said, "Our children shall be our guarantors." And the Holy One said, "They are certainly good guarantors. For their sake, I shall give you the Torah." I've been thinking a lot about this story recently as I've been noticing this new phenomenon. In being blessed to have a significant number of gorgeous new babies in our congregation, in every conversation I've had with new parents in the last week, it's been about 3 or 4 conversations, every single one of them has mentioned that they are seriously considering or reconsidering their educational choices for their children. This is in light of the recent controversy in the Toronto District School Board, the TDSB, as it adopts and continues to discuss definitions of anti-Palestinian racism. Whilst in principle this is legitimate as we aim to create schools that are inclusive, sensitive, and seek to foster excellence for every student, the proposed policy has led to a near dismissal of Jewish concerns amidst the noise, and in the words of our partners at CEJA, a redefinition of anti-Semitism and an erasure of core aspects of Jewish identity and history. Some of those parents who had considered a Jewish day school but weren't sure how they were going to make it work were now investigating how they could make it a priority. Some parents who hadn't considered Jewish day school were now wondering whether it might be the right choice for their families. Some parents who were concerned but who still hoped to send their tiny charges to public school for many reasons at least felt like our ECC here could be the sheltered, safe, joyous start to the Jewish education that they're seeking. This is not to be alarmist or to exaggerate. Just as our ancestors and our prophets could not necessarily see into the future as we wish it, neither can we as we pray for calm and for the best. I'm also not here to specifically talk about the TDSB this Shabbat. What I'm actually more interested in is what our Midrash and what these new parents highlighted to me. This was the good question regarding what principles should education, Jewishly or otherwise, highlight, and what kind of educational environment should the next generation be raised in. In short, with recent events and Jewish wisdom in mind, we're asking ourselves, what do we owe our children? In studying this week's parashah, Shlach, we might first learn that one aim might be to not settle for the way that things are now. In the book of Numbers, chapter 12, after the 12 spies have returned from their reconnaissance journey to the land, it's chapter 14, before attempting to conquer it, the Israelites complain bitterly out of the fear and despair that the scouts' report means their mission will be almost impossible. They rally against Moses and Aaron, their leaders, declaring dramatically, "Lo matnu be'eretz Mitzrayim o b'midbar hazeh lo matnu." If only we had died in the land of Egypt. If only we might die in this wilderness. Rabbi Plaut of blessed memory in his commentary points out, perhaps quite obviously, the negativity of these statements and how widespread they were, from the men, women, and children as they then converge in this idea, this request to return to the land of Egypt. This may seem odd, for although we can acknowledge that the desert was a dangerous and fearful place, and that the Israelites were facing many difficulties, including the prospect of war, why did they want to go back to Egypt? Why would they ever want to return to being slaves with no rights, no freedoms, no autonomy, no equal status? It might seem like a case of better the devil we know. Egypt was familiar. Egypt was nostalgic. Egypt was comfortable, even in its discomfort and mistreatment. However, for us today, it could be argued that neither ourselves nor our Israelite ancestors should settle for what was in the past, particularly when that situation was not actually one of justice. This is particularly when the Israelites, as we do now, have an opportunity to shape something better than before. Which brings me to our second aim, the second thing we might owe our next generation, which might then be to provide the best opportunity possible to break this generational cycle of hatred and vitriol. In an especially powerful pasuk from the parashah, trying to deflect God's anger at the people's refusal to believe the positive parts of the scouts' report from Joshua and Caleb, Moses beseeches God, Adonai, erech apayim v'rav chesed, noseh avon v'fesha, v'naka lo yinakeh, poked avon avot al banim, al shleshim v'al ribeim. Adonai, slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon their children, upon the third and fourth generations. Hold on, we might now think to ourselves, is this the God that we believe in, one who would be so unforgiving as to make the descendants many generations later pay for the sins of their forebearers? Our commentators note that the language in this verse, whilst reminiscent of its previous iteration after the incident of the golden calf, and perhaps familiar from our festivals including the High Holy Days, Adonai, Adonai el Rachum v'Chanun, this particular verse, the way it appears here, is amended to be a shortened description of God's 13 attributes. An explanation from Sforno, the 16th century Italian rabbi and physician, is that on the contrary, this is evidence of God's forgiveness, but with a word of warning. That God is waiting and watching to see whether the transgressions of our forebearers, will follow the familial line, or whether God can suspend retribution as it becomes clearer and clearer how those children and grandchildren and so on will conduct themselves. Put differently, according to Sforno, God reserves judgment until it is evident whether this chain will remain unbroken and whether this cycle will repeat itself until it's so ingrained in our literal DNA that we cannot reverse it. In our own day, we might interpret this as a cautionary tale, that we should not uplift one group at the expense of another, thus perpetuating a centuries-old conflict on the other side of the world. Rather, we should find solutions which build bridges and bridge gaps so that the next generation does not suffer in the same way that we have seen for what seems like time immemorial. And finally, we owe our children optimism, nothing more and nothing less than optimism. We see this in Joshua and Caleb's response to their fellow Israelites as they lament over the lackluster reports brought back to them by the other scouts. Joshua and Caleb, in opposition to their colleagues and contrary to the mood of their compatriots, say together, Ha'aretz asher avarnu ba latur ota, tova ha'aretz me'od me'od. The land we have traversed and scouted is an exceedingly good land. Im chafetz banu Adonai v'hevi otanu el ha'aretz hazot unetana lanu, eretz asher hi zavat chalav udvash. If it is pleased with us, Adonai will bring us into that land, a land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, in the name of psychologist Carol Dweck, suggests that Joshua and Caleb possessed what is known as a growth mindset, which is in short, the fear of failure but the willingness to try anyway, based on their own life experiences, which gave them the fortitude to contradict their colleagues and provide this positive perspective, even when it was not easy to do, and even though the path ahead was treacherous. In other words, no one is saying that we must pretend that everything is perfect and wonderful, not by any means. But what we are saying is that our children deserve a hopeful outlook for a future that is ultimately going to rest in their hands. As we conclude this Shabbat, as we reflect on our hopes and wishes for our children as they grow and learn, and as their parents and families begin to make these important, considered decisions for their precious young ones, there's a prayer in our Siddur that might say it best of all. It is an excerpt from our prayer for the study of Torah, which goes, V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha befinu, uvefi amcha Beit Yisrael, v'nihiyeh anachnu v'tze'atza'enu, v'tze'atza'ei amcha Beit Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha, v'lamdei Toratecha lishma, Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Adonai, our God, make the words of your Torah sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of your people Israel, so that we and our children shall come to know your name and study Torah for its own sake. Praise to you, Adonai, teacher of Torah to your people Israel. May our children be blessed with and become guarantors of a Torah that is secure, that is sweet, that speaks anew in its generation, that provides fresh opportunities for growth, and that is optimistic. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be the Torah that we pass down to them, for their sake, for our sake, and for the sake of our God's name. Shabbat Shalom.